The first blow came not from fists, but from laughter. A sharp, scornful laugh that echoed through the courtroom and cut through the millionaire's carefully constructed silence like a jagged knife. The wife laughed in front of the judge, mocking the man she once vowed to stand beside. And yet, amidst the gasps and whispers, there was one person who saw beyond the spectacle: the cook. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're preparing dinner for someone who won't even thank you, or washing dishes while everyone else sleeps. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise, today's story will touch your heart. Let me take you to a cold November morning in Chicago's Gold Coast, where Lake Michigan's wind cuts through even the most expensive glass windows. The Riley mansion stood like a fortress of marble and steel, its kitchen buried deep in the basement level, away from the pristine dining rooms where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on imported Italian marble. Down here, in this sanctuary of warmth and steam, Maria Esperanza began her day at 4:30 in the morning, just as she had for nearly 20 years. Her hands moved with practiced grace across the stainless steel counters, checking the industrial ovens that would soon breathe life into another day of ungrateful mouths. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's herbs still clinging to worn cutting boards, of coffee grounds waiting in the French press, of possibilities that would soon fill the mansion with aromas no one would acknowledge came from her heart. Maria was 52 years old, her black hair now streaked with silver that caught the harsh fluorescent lights. Her face carried the tired beauty of women who give more than they receive, lines mapping decades of 4 a.m. mornings and midnight cleanups. She wore the same white chef's coat she'd bought with her first paycheck, threadbare at the elbows, stained with the memories of 10,000 meals, but clean and pressed with the dignity she refused to surrender. Above her, 3 floors of luxury stretched toward the Chicago sky. Jonathan Riley slept in Egyptian cotton sheets worth more than most people's monthly salary, his net worth approaching 9 figures through tech investments and cryptocurrency ventures that had turned his early software patents into a financial empire. His wife, Vanessa, dreamed behind Botox-smoothed skin in a bed that cost more than a car, surrounded by designer handbags that held more value than Maria's annual wages. The house breathed with automated systems, climate control that responded to movement, security cameras in every corner except the kitchen, smart glass that tinted according to the sun's position. Everything was calculated, controlled, expensive. Everything except the invisible woman who made it feel like home. Maria pulled fresh eggs from the industrial refrigerator, each one carefully selected from a local farm in Wisconsin. She cracked them into a ceramic bowl, the sound echoing in the pre-dawn silence. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, teaching her to cook with love, not just ingredients. "Mija," the old woman used to say in their cramped apartment on Pilsen's 18th Street. "Food without heart is just fuel, but food made with love, that feeds the soul." As she whisked the eggs, adding a splash of heavy cream and a pinch of sea salt, Maria heard the first stirrings of life above. Mrs. Riley's designer heels clicked across hardwood floors, each step a staccato reminder of the distance between their worlds. Soon, the household would wake, and Maria would become invisible again, a ghost who materialized meals and vanished before gratitude could find her. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with rich, dark aromas that would soon drift upstairs to be consumed without thought. Maria had learned to make it exactly as Mr. Riley preferred, strong enough to cut through his perpetual exhaustion from managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions, mild enough not to disturb the delicate balance of his morning routine. She began preparing the Riley family's breakfast, knowing that in 2 hours, they would sit at their dining table discussing stock prices and social events, never once mentioning the woman whose hands had crafted their nourishment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She fed a family that owned restaurants across 3 states, yet she remained as invisible as the Chicago wind that howled past their windows. 20 years ago, Maria Esperanza had arrived at this mansion carrying nothing but a borrowed suitcase and a heart full of hope. She was 32 then, a recent immigrant from Guadalajara whose English came in careful, measured sentences. Her husband had died in a construction accident 3 months after they had arrived in Chicago, leaving her with a daughter to feed and dreams that seemed to shrink with each rejection letter. The agency had sent her to the Riley house for a temporary position. The previous cook had quit during the holidays, leaving the family scrambling for help during their annual Christmas party. Maria remembered that first day like a scar that never fully heals. Vanessa Riley, 20 years younger then but already sharp with entitlement, had looked her up and down like she was inspecting damaged goods. "She's very ethnic, isn't she?" Vanessa had whispered to her husband, as if Maria couldn't understand English. "Are you sure she can handle sophisticated cuisine? We have important investors coming." Jonathan Riley had barely looked up from his newspaper, his attention focused on checking his investment portfolio on an early laptop computer. "Just have her cook something simple. If it works out, we'll keep her through New Year's." That first meal had been Maria's silent manifesto. She'd prepared chili and nogada, the colors of the Mexican flag painted across delicate poblano peppers, the walnut cream sauce rich with cinnamon and sherry, pomegranate seeds scattered like rubies across white porcelain. She'd also made traditional American sides, garlic mashed potatoes smooth as silk, green beans sautéed with almonds, dinner rolls that emerged from the oven golden and steaming. The Christmas party guests had devoured everything, praising the unnamed chef who had created such magic. Maria had watched from the kitchen doorway as Jonathan Riley accepted compliments for finding such talent, never once mentioning her name. She'd learned that night that her worth was measured in pleased palates and empty plates, not in recognition or respect. The years that followed established a routine as predictable as Chicago's lake-effect snow. Maria would arrive before dawn, her bus ride from her small apartment in Little Village taking 45 minutes through city streets where her people worked invisible jobs. She'd prepare breakfast, pack lunches, plan dinner, shop at markets where she stretched the Riley food budget further than Vanessa thought possible, and return to cook elaborate meals for a family that barely acknowledged her existence. She watched Jonathan's fortune grow through overheard phone calls about IPOs and mergers, Bitcoin investments that turned thousands into millions overnight, real estate acquisitions that added properties to his portfolio like collectible cards. The mansion itself was worth $12 million, but Maria knew its true value lay in the laughter that once filled its rooms when the Riley children were young. Those children, Michael, Sarah, and little Eli, had been the bright spots in Maria's early years at the mansion. She'd packed their school lunches with extra love, adding handwritten notes in careful English that made them smile. She'd been there for scraped knees and broken hearts, offering cookies warm from the oven and patient ears that absorbed their childhood confessions. She remembered Michael at 8 years old, sitting on a kitchen stool while she taught him to fold tortillas. "Maria," he'd asked with innocent curiosity, "why do you make different food for us than you eat?" She'd explained about sharing, about how cooking for others was a gift, about how different families had different traditions. He'd nodded solemnly and asked if she could teach him to make her grandmother's tamales. Those lessons had been some of her happiest moments in the mansion. But children grow up, and priorities shift. Michael graduated from Northwestern and moved to New York to work in finance. Sarah married a doctor and moved to California's wine country. Only Eli remained, quiet and observant, now 16, and still sometimes finding his way to the kitchen when the world felt too complicated. As the years passed, Maria became furniture, essential but unnoticed. She knew every preference, every allergy, every birthday and anniversary. She knew that Mr. Riley ate his stress, that his blood pressure medication made him crave salt, that he kept a bottle of antacids in his desk drawer. She knew Vanessa's eating habits reflected her anxieties, that she picked at salads when worried about money and binged on desserts when feeling ignored. The Riley fortune continued to multiply. Investments in green energy, pharmaceutical stocks, and cryptocurrency that seemed to generate wealth while the family slept. Maria overheard phone conversations about diversified portfolios worth hundreds of millions, about offshore accounts and tax shelters that kept their money growing faster than they could spend it. Yet, in all their abundance, she noticed what they lost: connection to each other, gratitude for simple pleasures, understanding of what it meant to work with your hands. Maria's own financial situation remained precarious. She sent money to her aging mother in Mexico, supported her daughter through community college, and saved what little remained in a coffee can hidden in her bedroom. She had no retirement fund, no health insurance beyond the basic coverage the Rileys provided, no assets beyond her thrift store furniture and the cookbook collection she'd built from garage sales and library discards. The inequality stung, not because she envied their wealth, but because she understood that money without wisdom was just numbers in a bank account. She'd watched the Riley family drift apart despite having everything money could buy. Their dinners became silent affairs, each person absorbed in their own devices, consuming her carefully prepared meals without tasting them, without connecting to each other, or acknowledging the love she'd stirred into every dish. Winter mornings in Chicago were brutal, the wind whipping off Lake Michigan with a vengeance that cut through even the warmest coat. Maria's arthritis protested the cold, her joints stiff from years of standing at stoves and kneading dough. But she never complained, never missed a day, never let her personal struggles affect the quality of her work. She learned to read the house's moods through 20 years of observation. When Jonathan stayed late in his study, she'd leave a thermos of coffee and a sandwich outside his door. When Vanessa had been shopping, evident from the designer bags scattered in the foyer, Maria would prepare lighter meals to counteract whatever expensive lunch had preceded them. When Eli seemed withdrawn, she'd bake his favorite chocolate chip cookies and leave them cooling on the counter where their aroma could find him. These small gestures were her rebellion against invisibility, her quiet insistence that love existed in this house even if it went unrecognized. She was the heart that kept beating while everyone else focused on the pulse of stock prices and social status. The kitchen had become her domain, a sanctuary where she could practice the art her grandmother had taught her. Every meal was a prayer, every seasoning a note in a symphony only she could hear. She cooked not just for nourishment, but for connection, hoping that somewhere in the layers of flavor and care, the Riley family might remember what it felt like to be grateful. But gratitude, Maria had learned, was often the rarest ingredient in a house full of plenty. Daily humiliations arrived as predictably as the sunrise, each one a small death that Maria absorbed with practiced silence. Vanessa Riley had perfected the art of dismissal, delivering cutting remarks with the casual cruelty of someone who had never questioned their own worth. "Maria, this salmon is overcooked," she'd announce at dinner parties, her voice carrying enough volume to ensure the guests heard. "I suppose that's what we get for not hiring a real chef." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to burrow deep. Maria wasn't formally trained. She'd learned to cook from her grandmother's patient hands and her mother's whispered instructions. She hadn't attended culinary school or worked in prestigious restaurants. She was self-taught, guided by instinct and love rather than technique and theory. But her food spoke its own language, one that filled bellies and warmed hearts, even if it couldn't earn respect. "Anyone can throw ingredients in a pot," Vanessa would tell her friends during their afternoon gatherings, their laughter sharp as broken glass. "It's not like it requires real skill, not like running a business or managing investments." The friends would nod politely, sipping tea Maria had brewed perfectly, eating finger sandwiches she'd cut into precise triangles, consuming her labor while dismissing her worth. Jonathan's indifference cut deeper than Vanessa's cruelty. He consumed Maria's meals with the distracted efficiency of a man checking items off a list. Breakfast appeared. He ate it while reading financial reports. Dinner materialized. He consumed it while discussing cryptocurrency trends with business associates. She could have been a machine for all the attention he paid to the care she invested in every meal. "The market's volatile today," he'd tell his phone during breakfast, not looking up as Maria refilled his coffee for the third time. My Bitcoin holdings are up 12%, but the pharmaceutical stocks are taking a hit. Numbers, always numbers. His fortune measured in dollars and percentages, never in the warmth of a well-prepared meal or the devotion of someone who anticipated his needs before he voiced them. The worst moments came during the Riley family's social gatherings, dinner parties where Chicago's elite gathered to discuss their latest acquisitions and investment strategies. Maria would spend days preparing elaborate menus, sourcing the finest ingredients, crafting presentations that belonged in magazines. She'd work 18-hour days, her feet swollen in shoes that had been resoled 3 times, her back aching from hunching over intricate garnishes. The guests would arrive in cars worth more than Maria's lifetime earnings, their jewelry catching light from crystal chandeliers, their conversation flowing around topics she could never join. They'd consume her creations with enthusiastic praise. "This is extraordinary. Where did you find this chef?" But Jonathan would accept the compliments as if he'd cooked the meals himself. "We're very particular about our food," he'd explain, swirling wine in crystal glasses Maria had hand-polished. "Quality ingredients, proper technique, it makes all the difference." Never mentioning Maria's name, never acknowledging the hands that had transformed those ingredients into art. During one particularly elaborate dinner party celebrating Jonathan's latest tech startup acquisition, Maria had prepared a 7-course meal inspired by her grandmother's recipes, but elevated with techniques she'd secretly learned by watching YouTube videos on her phone during lunch breaks. The mole poblano alone had required 3 days of preparation, 28 ingredients ground by hand, a complexity of flavors that told the story of her heritage. The guests had been effusive in their praise. "This is restaurant quality, better than anything I've had in the city." But when someone asked where Jonathan had found such an exceptional chef, he'd wave dismissively toward the kitchen. "Oh, we have someone who handles the cooking. Nothing too complicated." Maria, listening from behind the swinging doors, had felt something crack inside her chest. 20 years of devotion reduced to someone who handles the cooking. She'd retreated to the pantry where no one could see her tears, surrounded by the ingredients she'd transformed into love letters no one bothered to read. The financial discussions during these gatherings were another form of torture. She'd serve courses while the guests casually mentioned assets worth more than entire neighborhoods, real estate portfolios, stock options, cryptocurrency wallets, inheritance funds that generated more interest in a month than Maria earned in a year. They spoke of money with the casual familiarity of people who had never worried about rent or medical bills or sending money to elderly parents. "My portfolio manager suggested diversifying into emerging markets," one guest mentioned, while Maria cleared plates scraped clean of her mole. "The returns on my Asian investments have been remarkable, nearly 30% this quarter." She calculated silently that 30% of his casual investment would pay her salary for 5 years. Vanessa's friends were particularly cruel when they thought Maria couldn't understand their conversations. They'd switch to what they believed was sophisticated vocabulary, discussing their domestic staff problems as if Maria were deaf or stupid. "Help is so difficult to find these days," one woman complained while Maria served handcrafted appetizers. "They all want benefits and time off, as if basic labor deserves special compensation." "At least yours can cook," another replied, reaching for a 4th canapé Maria had spent 2 hours preparing. "Mine burns toast, but what can you expect from their background?" The microaggressions accumulated like paper cuts, each one small but collectively devastating. Vanessa would compliment Maria's English while correcting her pronunciation in front of guests. She'd ask if Maria understood complex instructions, speaking slowly and loudly as if volume could bridge imaginary comprehension gaps. She'd rearrange Maria's perfectly organized pantry, claiming it needed proper organization, then complain when she couldn't find ingredients Maria had logically arranged by cuisine and frequency of use. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect of Maria's daily existence. She spent 10 to 12 hours in the mansion, but remained fundamentally alone, surrounded by family members who saw her as animated furniture. She ate her meals standing at the kitchen counter while they gathered around the dining room table she'd set with careful attention to every detail. She celebrated their milestones by preparing elaborate feasts, then cleaned up alone while they toasted achievements she'd helped enable through her invisible support. Christmas mornings were particularly difficult. Maria would arrive before dawn to prepare the traditional breakfast the Riley family expected: eggs Benedict with hollandaise made from scratch, fresh-baked croissants, fruit salad arranged like stained glass windows. She'd wrap their gifts in paper they'd purchased, using techniques learned from YouTube tutorials to create professional-looking presentations. She'd cook the Christmas dinner they'd request: prime rib with Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables, desserts that took days to prepare. Then she'd clean the kitchen, store the leftovers, and take the bus home to her empty apartment, where no gifts waited under her own small tree. Her daughter lived across town with her own family now, and Christmas had become just another workday Maria spent ensuring other people's happiness while her own remained an afterthought. The worst humiliation came on Maria's 50th birthday, a milestone she'd mentioned only to Eli in passing. She'd worked that day as usual, preparing a dinner party for Jonathan's business associates, men whose cryptocurrency investments had made them wealthy beyond imagination. She'd spent the morning crafting individual beef Wellingtons, the afternoon preparing delicate soufflés, the evening serving courses to guests who discussed their stock portfolios between bites. As she served dessert, chocolate lava cakes that had required precise timing and temperature control, she overheard one guest ask Jonathan about his overhead costs. Jonathan had laughed, glancing toward the kitchen where Maria worked invisibly. "The staff? Negligible expenses. We keep costs low by avoiding the high-end service providers. Sometimes you can find quality at discount prices." Discount prices. 20 years of devotion reduced to a budget line item. Maria had finished serving dessert with shaking hands, retreated to the kitchen, and quietly celebrated her half-century of life with leftover soup and tears that seasoned her meal with salt. But even in the depths of humiliation, Maria maintained her dignity. She never responded to the cruel comments, never defended herself against false assumptions, never allowed their disrespect to diminish the love she poured into her work. She understood that their behavior reflected their emptiness, not her worth. Still, understanding didn't make the wounds hurt less. Eli Riley had always been different from the rest of his family. Quieter, more observant, allergic to the casual cruelty that seasoned his parents' conversations. At 16, he possessed the awkward grace of adolescence and the tired eyes of someone who'd witnessed too much indifference. While his parents discussed portfolio diversification over breakfast, Eli noticed that Maria's hands shook slightly when she was nervous, that she hummed Mexican lullabies while kneading bread, that she saved the best pieces of fruit for others and ate the bruised ones herself. The connection began during one of Chicago's brutal snowstorms when Eli, home with a fever, discovered Maria in the kitchen at 2 a.m. She was preparing chicken soup from scratch, the broth simmering with vegetables she'd saved from earlier meals, herbs crushed by hand to release their healing oils. The kitchen glowed with warmth, while outside, wind howled through the Gold Coast like an angry spirit. "You don't have to cook for me," Eli had said, his voice hoarse from illness. "There's canned soup in the pantry." Maria looked up from her cutting board where she'd been dicing celery with practiced precision. "Canned soup feeds hunger," she replied softly. "Real soup feeds the soul." She ladled the aromatic broth into a bowl, added fresh pasta she'd rolled that afternoon, garnished it with cilantro and a squeeze of lime. "My grandmother used to say that when someone is sick, food becomes medicine. But only if it's made with intention." That night, sitting in the kitchen while Maria worked around him with quiet efficiency, Eli felt something he'd never experienced in his family's mansion: belonging. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, punctuated by the gentle sounds of Maria's movements and the storm raging outside their warm sanctuary. Over the following months, Eli began gravitating toward the kitchen during his free time. He'd arrive home from his elite private school, where his classmates discussed their family's hedge fund performances and vacation home acquisitions, and find Maria preparing dinner with the same care she'd shown for 20 years. He'd sit at the small table she used for meal prep and tell her about his day while she worked. "The kids at school think money solves everything," he confided one afternoon while Maria shaped empanadas, her fingers creating perfect crescents with practiced ease. "They talk about their parents' investments like scoreboards. Who made more on crypto? Who bought better properties? It's like they're competing for who can be most removed from reality." Maria listened while seasoning ground beef with cumin and paprika, understanding that Eli needed someone to hear his confusion without judgment. "Money is a tool," she finally said, her voice gentle. "Like a knife. It can cut vegetables for soup or cause terrible harm. The person holding it chooses how to use it." These conversations became Eli's refuge from a family that measured worth in net worth. Maria would share stories about her grandmother's cooking lessons, about learning to make tortillas by watching patient hands shape masa into perfect circles. She'd teach him practical skills his expensive education ignored: how to test oil temperature without a thermometer, how to judge doneness by sound and smell, how to taste as you cook to adjust seasoning. "Cooking is conversation," she explained while teaching him to make her grandmother's salsa verde. "The ingredients talk to each other. Tomatillos are sharp, cilantro is bright, onions are sweet. Your job is to help them become friends." Eli would watch, mesmerized, as she transformed simple ingredients into flavors that told stories. The bond deepened when Eli discovered Maria sending money to Mexico each month, carefully counting bills at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. He learned about her mother's medical expenses, her brother's family struggling after a factory closure, the nieces and nephews whose school supplies Maria purchased with money saved from her modest salary. "You take care of so many people," Eli observed, watching her write "for Rosa's medicine" on an envelope containing $100 bills she'd saved over months. "Family is not just the people who live with you," Maria replied, licking the envelope closed. "Family is the people whose burdens you choose to carry." The contrast struck Eli like a physical blow. His parents' wealth generated millions in investment returns annually, money that accumulated faster than they could spend it. Yet Maria, earning barely enough to support herself, shared what little she had with extended family members his parents would dismiss as financial drains. Her generosity shamed their abundance. Eli began spending entire afternoons in the kitchen, learning not just recipes but philosophy. Maria taught him that hospitality was about making people feel welcomed, not impressed. She showed him how to set a table so guests felt honored, how to serve food with pride rather than apology, how to create atmosphere through attention to small details. "Presentation is important," she explained while arranging vegetables on a platter, "but not to show off. We make food beautiful as a gift to the people eating it. We show them their meal deserves care." During one memorable lesson, Maria taught Eli to make mole from scratch, the complex sauce that had brought tears to her eyes years earlier when his father dismissed it as nothing too complicated. The recipe required patience, precision, and understanding of how flavors evolved through slow cooking. As they worked together, grinding spices and adjusting seasoning, Maria shared memories of learning the recipe from her grandmother, who'd learned it from her own mother. "This sauce carries 5 generations of women," she told Eli as he stirred chocolate into the dark, complex mixture. "Each one added something, a technique, a story, a prayer. When you make mole, you're connected to all of us." Eli began to understand that Maria's food was a form of cultural preservation, each recipe a thread connecting her to heritage the Riley family had never bothered to acknowledge. Her cooking wasn't just nourishment, it was resistance against erasure, a quiet insistence that her people's traditions had value. Their relationship became Maria's greatest joy and her most carefully guarded secret. She knew Vanessa would disapprove of her son wasting time in the kitchen with the help. She'd witnessed enough privileged families to understand that crossing class boundaries made employers uncomfortable. threatening hierarchies they needed to maintain their sense of superiority. So they created a private world in the kitchen after hours, when the rest of the house slept and Maria prepared for the following day. Eli would help with prep work while she shared stories about growing up in Guadalajara, about her grandmother's restaurant that fed construction workers and taxi drivers, about recipes that had sustained families through poverty and displacement. "Your grandmother sounds amazing," Eli said one evening while they made tamales together. Corn husks soaking in warm water while masa mixed with lard and salt. "She fed people who couldn't always pay," Maria replied, spreading masa on husks with practiced strokes. She said hungry people deserved dignity, not charity. So she'd let them work for meals, washing dishes, sweeping floors, everyone left with full stomachs and their pride intact. These stories taught Eli lessons his elite education missed, about dignity and honest work, about community responsibility, about wealth that couldn't be measured in investment portfolios. He began to see his family's lifestyle through different eyes, recognizing the emptiness behind their abundance. The secret friendship sustained Maria through periods of particularly cruel treatment from Vanessa and indifference from Jonathan. When she felt invisible, Eli's genuine interest in her stories reminded her that she mattered. When she questioned her worth, his eagerness to learn her techniques proved her knowledge had value. When she felt alone, their quiet conversations reminded her that connection was possible even across boundaries of class and culture. The challenge arrived on a Tuesday morning in March when Jonathan announced that the Riley family would be hosting their most important dinner party yet, a gathering of potential investors for his latest cryptocurrency venture, men whose combined net worth approached $1 billion. The event would determine whether Jonathan's blockchain technology startup received the funding needed to compete with established financial institutions. "This dinner could change everything," he told Vanessa over breakfast, his voice carrying an excitement Maria hadn't heard in years. "If we can convince Chen and Martinez to lead the investment round, we'll have the capital to revolutionize digital banking. The potential returns are astronomical." Vanessa's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam she reserved for social opportunities. "We'll need something special, something that demonstrates our sophistication and attention to detail. This isn't a family barbecue. These are serious people with serious money." Maria, refilling coffee cups with practiced invisibility, felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Important dinners meant days of preparation, sourcing premium ingredients, crafting menus that would impress without overshadowing conversation. She'd catered similar events before, gatherings where business deals worth millions were negotiated over carefully prepared courses. "We should hire a real chef for this," Vanessa continued, her words striking Maria like physical blows. "Someone with proper credentials, a name the guests might recognize. This opportunity is too important to leave to routine catering." Jonathan nodded absently, already absorbed in his phone where cryptocurrency prices fluctuated by the minute. "Whatever you think is best. Cost isn't a concern. The potential returns justify significant investment in presentation." That afternoon, Vanessa hired Philippe Dubois, a celebrity chef whose restaurant in River North had earned a Michelin star and whose personality had earned him a cooking show on the Food Network. Philippe arrived at the mansion with an entourage of assistants, cases of specialized equipment, and an ego that filled rooms like expensive cologne. "I don't typically cater private events," he announced, surveying the kitchen Maria had maintained for 20 years. "But when Jonathan Riley calls about $1 billion dinner, exceptions can be made." His assistants laughed appropriately, unpacking molecular gastronomy equipment and ingredients Maria couldn't afford on a year's salary. Philippe examined Maria's workspace with the condescension of a master reviewing apprentice work. "This setup is quaint," he said, running fingers across cutting boards she'd seasoned with 20 years of careful use. "Little rustic, but we'll make it work. Who's been handling the family's meal preparation?" "The help," Vanessa replied dismissively, gesturing toward Maria without using her name. "She's adequate for daily needs, but this event requires professional expertise." Maria felt herself shrinking into invisibility, becoming furniture in her own kitchen. Felipe's assistants rearranged her carefully organized spice collection, replaced her familiar tools with gadgets she'd never seen, transformed her sanctuary into a television set for someone else's performance. "You won't be needed for the dinner preparation," Felipe told Maria without looking at her. "I prefer to work with my own team. We have different standards, different techniques. I'm sure you understand." But Maria didn't understand. She'd spent 2 decades learning the Riley family's preferences, understanding their guests' dietary restrictions, creating memorable meals from ingredients she'd selected with care. She'd watched Felipe on television, admired his technical skills, but recognized that his cooking lacked the soul that transformed food into love. For the next week, Maria became a ghost in her own kitchen. She prepared simple breakfast and lunch while Felipe's team commandeered the space for their elaborate dinner preparations. She watched them work with expensive ingredients: Wagyu beef, white truffles, caviar that cost more per ounce than Maria earned in a month, creating dishes that looked like art installations but lacked the warmth that made meals memorable. Felipe treated Maria with the casual dismissal reserved for obsolete equipment. When she offered suggestions based on 20 years of experience with the Riley family's preferences, he waved her away like an annoying insect. "Traditional methods have their place," he said condescendingly, "but modern cuisine requires scientific precision, molecular gastronomy, precise temperature control, presentations that challenge preconceptions about food." The night before the dinner, Maria stayed late to ensure the kitchen was perfectly clean for Felipe's final preparations. As she polished surfaces and organized supplies, she overheard him briefing his assistants about the menu: deconstructed classics, foam-based sauces, proteins cooked sous vide, and finished with liquid nitrogen smoke effects. "The presentation will be stunning," Felipe declared. "Each course tells a story of transformation, of taking familiar concepts and elevating them beyond recognition. These investors will remember this dinner for years." Maria felt a pang of loss she couldn't articulate. She understood that Felipe was technically proficient, that his dishes would photograph beautifully, that his reputation would impress the guests. But she also knew that memorable meals weren't just about stunning presentations. They were about connection, warmth, the feeling that someone had cared enough to consider your preferences and craft nourishment specifically for you. The dinner party took place on a Saturday evening, when March wind rattled the mansion's windows and Lake Michigan threw waves against the Chicago shoreline like declarations of war. Maria had been asked to stay late to assist with serving, her familiarity with the house layout making her useful for navigating between kitchen and dining room. She watched through the service doors as Chicago's financial elite gathered in the Riley dining room, men whose cryptocurrency investments had made them wealthy beyond traditional measures, women whose jewelry collections could fund small countries. They consumed Felipe's molecular creations with appropriate admiration, photographing dishes that looked like modern art sculptures. But Maria noticed what Felipe missed: the subtle confusion in guests' eyes when presented with familiar foods, transformed beyond recognition, the polite uncertainty as they navigated flavors that prioritized innovation over satisfaction. The conversations remained focused on business rather than the meal, treating Felipe's creations as elaborate backdrop rather than shared experience. During the main course, deconstructed beef, Wellington served as separate components on porcelain sculptures. Maria overheard one investor whisper to another, "It's impressive, but I can't figure out what I'm actually eating. Sometimes I miss food that just tastes good." The evening concluded with Felipe accepting congratulations for his artistic presentations, while the guests discussed investment terms over coffee. Jonathan secured preliminary commitments for his cryptocurrency venture, the business success overshadowing any questions about the meal's memorability. Later, as Maria cleaned up the elaborate plates and specialized equipment Felipe's team had left behind, she found herself mourning something she couldn't name. She'd been replaced by someone more technically skilled, more famous, more aligned with the Riley family's image of sophistication. Yet the kitchen felt hollow, emptied of the love that had once made it a sanctuary. Eli found her there at midnight, sitting at the small prep table where they'd shared so many conversations. "The dinner was successful," he said quietly. "Dad got his investment commitments." "That's good," Maria replied, though her voice carried no conviction. "Philippe's food was impressive," Eli continued, choosing his words carefully. "But it felt like eating in a museum. Beautiful to look at, but cold somehow. I kept thinking about your mole, how it tells stories. His food just showed off." Maria smiled sadly, recognizing Eli's attempt to comfort her. Different chefs have different purposes. His food is for impressing. Mine is for nourishing. "Which purpose matters more?" Eli asked. Maria considered the question while stacking Felipe's expensive plates in the dishwasher. "Both have value," she finally answered, "but only one feeds the soul." The invitation came on expensive stationery, delivered by courier on a Thursday afternoon when April rain drummed against the mansion's windows like impatient fingers. Jonathan Riley was hosting the most important gathering of his career, a presentation for Chinese investors whose cryptocurrency fund managed assets worth over $2 billion. Success would establish his blockchain technology as a serious competitor to traditional banking systems. Failure would mean watching his company slowly dissolve into irrelevance. "This isn't just dinner," Jonathan explained to Vanessa, his voice tight with nervous energy. "Chen's investment group controls more Bitcoin than most small countries. If we can convince them to fund our expansion into Asian markets, we'll be looking at returns that could triple our net worth within 2 years. The guest list read, like a cryptocurrency hall of fame. Venture capitalists whose early Bitcoin investments had created unprecedented fortunes, tech entrepreneurs whose blockchain innovations had disrupted entire industries, financial advisors who managed digital asset portfolios for sovereign wealth funds. These weren't just wealthy people. They were architects of a new economic reality." Philippe Dubois arrived the day before the dinner with even more elaborate equipment than before: liquid nitrogen tanks, precision temperature devices, cameras to document what he called the most important culinary performance of my career. He'd planned a menu that pushed molecular gastronomy into uncharted territory, creating dishes that challenged every assumption about food preparation and presentation. "This dinner will be legendary," Philippe announced to his expanded team of assistants. "We're creating edible art that matches the innovative spirit of our guests. Traditional cooking is dead. We're witnessing the future of cuisine." Maria watched the preparations with growing unease. She'd been relegated to basic cleaning duties, while Felipa's team transformed her kitchen into what resembled a chemistry laboratory more than a place where food was prepared with love. The familiar warmth of her sanctuary had been replaced by clinical efficiency and artistic pretension. 2 hours before the guests arrived, disaster struck with the sudden inevitability of Chicago thunderstorms. Philippe, attempting to create his signature deconstructed forest appetizer using liquid nitrogen and edible moss, misjudged the chemical reaction between competing molecular compounds. The resulting explosion, more aroma than damage, filled the kitchen with acrid smoke that triggered every alarm system in the mansion. In the chaos that followed, Philippe's carefully planned timeline collapsed like a house of cards. His liquid nitrogen equipment malfunctioned, his molecular foam separators produced bitter results instead of delicate flavors, and his artistic presentations dissolved into unappetizing puddles under the kitchen's bright lights. With 30 minutes until guests arrived and no backup plan, Philippe's sophisticated veneer cracked completely. "This is impossible," he shouted at his assistants. "The equipment is faulty, the timing is wrong, everything is ruined." Vanessa burst into the kitchen, her designer dress rustling with panic. "What's happening? The guests are arriving soon and I can smell smoke upstairs." "Technical difficulties," Felipe replied, his celebrity composure evaporating. "The molecular gastronomy requires perfect conditions. Perhaps we should postpone..." Absolutely not, Vanessa cut him off. This dinner determines our family's financial future. Figure something out, or I'll find someone who can. In the terrible silence that followed, all eyes turned to Maria, who had been quietly cleaning in the corner while Felipe's empire crumbled around her. She looked at the chaos, expensive ingredients scattered across counters, sophisticated equipment smoking uselessly, a team of trained professionals paralyzed by the collapse of their elaborate plans. I could prepare something simple, Maria offered quietly, her voice barely audible above the kitchen's ventilation system working to clear the smoke. Philippe laughed, a harsh sound edged with hysteria. Simple. These guests expect innovation, artistry, presentations they'll remember for years. They're not coming for peasant food. But Jonathan had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion and growing increasingly frantic as he realized his crucial dinner was dissolving into catastrophe. "What are our options?" he asked desperately, his usual composure replaced by naked panic. "I know what your guests like," Maria said, stepping forward with quiet confidence. "I've been watching, listening. Mr. Chen mentioned missing his grandmother's cooking when he was here last month. Mrs. Martinez talked about simple flavors that remind her of childhood. They appreciate innovation, but they're hungry for connection." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of cars arriving in the circular driveway. Felipe's assistants looked at their leader, waiting for direction that wasn't coming. Vanessa's eyes darted between Felipe's useless equipment and Maria's calm confidence. "You have 25 minutes to create a miracle," Jonathan told Maria, his voice carrying the weight of everything he'd built over decades of careful investment and strategic planning. Maria nodded once, then began moving through the kitchen with purposeful grace. No molecular gastronomy, no liquid nitrogen, no edible art installations. Instead, she reached for ingredients she understood intimately. Fresh herbs that released their oils when properly handled, proteins that sang when cooked with patience and attention, vegetables that revealed their sweetness through careful preparation. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory guiding her through techniques learned over 40 years of cooking with love. She prepared what she knew best, food that comforted while impressing, dishes that honored both tradition and innovation through simplicity rather than complexity. She began with a soup that could be prepared quickly but tasted like hours of slow simmering, roasted tomato and red pepper bisque, enriched with cream and brightened with fresh basil. While it heated, she pan-seared duck breasts, their skin crisping to golden perfection while the meat remained perfectly pink. Alongside, she prepared wild rice pilaf, studded with cranberries and pecans, the nutty grains absorbing flavors that spoke of American abundance and immigrant adaptation. For the finale, she crafted individual chocolate lava cakes using a technique she'd perfected through years of trial and error, timing the baking precisely so the centers remained molten while the edges set perfectly. No molecular manipulation, no artistic presentation beyond the inherent beauty of well-prepared food. As she worked, Philippe and his assistants watched in stunned silence. Maria's cooking looked almost primitive compared to their sophisticated techniques, yet the aromas filling the kitchen were intoxicating. The soup's fragrance carried depth that no foam could replicate. The duck's skin crackled with promise. The chocolate cakes emerged from the oven with surfaces that begged to be broken open. With 5 minutes to spare, Maria plated the first course with hands that barely trembled despite the enormous pressure. No architectural presentations, no molecular surprises, just beautiful food arranged with care and garnished with herbs she'd grown herself on the kitchen's windowsill. "This is what you're serving?" Vanessa asked, her voice carrying disbelief. "It looks so ordinary." "It looks like love," Eli said quietly from the doorway, where he'd been watching Maria work with the admiration of someone who understood what he was witnessing. The guests were seated, their conversations flowing around cryptocurrency valuations and blockchain innovations while they waited for dinner. Maria served the first course with Felipe's traumatized assistants, helping to carry plates, her simple presentation a stark contrast to the elaborate theatrical productions they'd expected. But something magical happened when the investors tasted Maria's soup. Conversations paused mid-sentence as complex flavors registered on palates accustomed to elaborate preparations. The bisque was simultaneously familiar and surprising, comforting and sophisticated, warm in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. "This is extraordinary," Chen said to Jonathan, his voice carrying genuine surprise. "Where did you find this chef?" Jonathan, still shaken by the evening's near disaster, managed a weak smile. "She's been with our family for many years." The evening proceeded with similar success. Maria's duck breast prompted requests for the recipe. Her wild rice pilaf generated discussions about American fusion cuisine. Her chocolate lava cakes concluded the meal with satisfied sighs and promises to return. The investors left with signed preliminary agreements and memories of food that had touched something deeper than their professionally refined palates. Later, as Maria cleaned the kitchen while Felipe's team packed their unused molecular equipment, she reflected on the evening's lesson. Innovation had its place, but connection remained the foundation of memorable meals. The most sophisticated techniques meant nothing if they created distance rather than warmth, impression rather than satisfaction. Jonathan appeared in the kitchen as she finished wiping the last counters. "The dinner was successful," he said awkwardly, clearly struggling with unfamiliar gratitude. "Chen's group agreed to fund the expansion. The deal will be worth, well, more than I'd hoped." Maria nodded quietly, folding her apron with tired hands. She'd saved the evening, preserved his financial future, proven that 20 years of experience had value beyond what could be measured in certificates or television appearances. "Thank you," Jonathan added, the words seeming to surprise him with their sincerity. It was the first time in 20 years he'd thanked her directly. Maria went home that night carrying those two words like a small flame against the darkness, proof that even the most invisible labor could sometimes be seen. But she had no way of knowing that her moment of recognition was about to be shattered by betrayal more devastating than 20 years of indifference. The accusation came like a knife thrust into Maria's heart during what should have been her greatest moment of professional triumph. 3 days after the successful investor dinner, as the Riley family celebrated Jonathan's cryptocurrency venture securing $2 billion in funding, Vanessa stormed into the kitchen with explosive fury. "My great-grandmother's recipe is missing," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The one I was planning to sell to that cooking magazine, the secret family recipe worth $50,000. Her eyes blazed with theatrical outrage as she surveyed the kitchen Maria had just finished cleaning after breakfast preparation. Maria looked up from the industrial dishwasher, confusion replacing her usual careful composure. "I don't understand, Mrs. Riley. Which recipe?" "Don't play innocent with me," Vanessa snapped, her designer heels clicking against the ceramic tiles as she paced like a predator. "Great-grandmother Margaret's Christmas pudding recipe, the one that was supposedly worth a fortune to collectors of authentic Victorian-era formulations. The magazine was going to feature it in their holiday issue, pay us handsomely for exclusive rights." The reference meant nothing to Maria, who had never seen this mysterious recipe during 20 years of organizing the Riley family's kitchen materials. She'd cataloged every cookbook, every handwritten note, every scrap of culinary history the family possessed. No Victorian Christmas pudding recipe existed in her carefully maintained files. "Mrs. Riley, I've never seen such a recipe," Maria said honestly, her voice steady despite the growing dread that settled in her stomach like spoiled milk. "Are you certain it was in the kitchen?" "Of course I'm certain." Vanessa's voice rose to a pitch that brought Jonathan running from his study, where he'd been monitoring cryptocurrency markets that were making him richer by the hour. "It was in the antique recipe box on top of the pantry shelf, the same box that's been there for decades." Jonathan arrived looking irritated at the interruption, his phone still displaying Bitcoin values that fluctuated in real time. "What's all this noise about?" "Your cook has stolen from us," Vanessa declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Maria with the certainty of someone who had never questioned her own assumptions. That recipe was worth serious money, not just the magazine payment, but potential cookbook deals, maybe even television appearances. She's the only one with access to the kitchen after hours. The words hit Maria like physical blows, each syllable carrying 20 years of accumulated prejudice and class-based suspicion. She felt the familiar sensation of becoming invisible, of being reduced to stereotypes rather than seen as the individual who had served this family faithfully through 2 decades of their lives. "That's impossible," Maria protested, her voice growing smaller as she recognized the futility of defending herself against predetermined conclusions. "I would never take anything that wasn't mine. This kitchen, this family. I've given everything to serve you honestly." But Vanessa had already constructed her narrative with the creative passion she usually reserved for redecorating rooms. She's been planning this for months, probably since the successful dinner party when she realized she had temporary value. She saw an opportunity and took it, capitalizing on our trust, our generosity over the years. Jonathan studied Maria with the cold calculation he applied to investment decisions, weighing risks and potential returns with practiced efficiency. His cryptocurrency fortune had risen another 12% since morning, but financial success had never taught him to read human character. He saw a domestic employee who had access and opportunity, balanced against a wife's certainty and his own desire to avoid complicated domestic drama. "The recipe box is indeed missing," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of financial authority. "And you do have the most access to kitchen storage areas." "Mr. Riley," Maria pleaded, her dignity warring with the desperate need to be believed, "in 20 years, have I ever taken anything? Have I ever given you reason to doubt my honesty? That dinner party, I saved your business deal, your future. Why would I steal from people I've served faithfully?" But Jonathan's attention was already shifting back to his phone, where market notifications demanded immediate response. His investment portfolio required constant monitoring, and domestic staff problems seemed trivial compared to cryptocurrency fluctuations that could cost or gain millions within hours. "Vanessa handles household management," he said dismissively, effectively washing his hands of the situation. "Whatever she thinks is appropriate." Vanessa smiled with predatory satisfaction, sensing victory in her husband's abdication of responsibility. "I think it's clear what needs to happen. After 20 years, maybe it's time for a change anyway. Someone fresher, more trustworthy." The dismissal was swift and brutal. No investigation, no benefit of doubt, no acknowledgement of 2 decades spent anticipating the Riley family's every need. Maria was given 30 minutes to collect her personal belongings, while Vanessa watched like a prison guard, ensuring no additional theft occurred during the transition. Maria's personal items filled a single cardboard box, a coffee mug her daughter had given her, a small radio that played Mexican music during lonely evening shifts, photographs of her family taped inside her narrow locker, the worn cookbook collection she'd assembled from garage sales and discounted bookstore visits. 20 years of life reduced to objects that fit in a container originally designed for copy paper. The other household staff, the part-time cleaning crew, the groundskeeping team, the occasional maintenance workers, watched her departure with the terrified silence of people who recognized their own vulnerability. Today, it was Maria. Tomorrow it could be any of them, dismissed on suspicion, erased from comfortable employment without warning or appeal process. Eli found her at the bus stop 40 minutes later, his young face twisted with outrage and helplessness. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "That recipe never existed. Mom made it up. I heard her on the phone with her friend, laughing about creating a story important enough to justify firing you." Maria felt no surprise at this revelation, only the deep sadness of confirmed expectations. She'd served a family long enough to understand their capacity for casual cruelty, their willingness to sacrifice others for minor conveniences or social performances. Sometimes people need reasons for actions they've already decided to take, she told Eli gently, adjusting the collar of his school blazer with the automatic care she'd shown him for 16 years. Your mother wanted me gone. She found a way to make it happen. But why? Eli demanded. You've been perfect. You've done everything for us, taken care of everyone. The house won't be the same without you. Maria smiled sadly, recognizing the innocent confusion of someone raised with privilege who couldn't comprehend motivations beyond logic and fairness. I reminded her of things she preferred to forget. Kindness, service, gratitude. These made her uncomfortable. It's easier to eliminate reminders than change behavior. The number 36 bus arrived with hydraulic sighs and diesel fumes, its doors opening to reveal worn seats filled with working people heading home from jobs that rarely provided recognition or security. Maria climbed the steps with careful dignity, her card box balanced under one arm, 20 years of her life, ending with a transfer fee and a ride through city streets that suddenly felt foreign. The mansion disappeared behind Chicago's urban landscape as the bus wound through neighborhoods that transitioned from privilege to practicality. Maria stared through windows that needed washing, watching the city she'd served fade into memory, carrying with her the weight of injustice and the peculiar freedom that comes with having nothing left to lose. But she had no way of knowing that her absence would create a void in the Riley mansion that no amount of cryptocurrency wealth could fill, or that truth has its own timeline, independent of convenience or social performance. The silence that settled over the Riley mansion after Maria's departure was profound and unsettling, like the hollow quiet that follows an explosion. It began in the kitchen, where expensive appliances hummed with mechanical efficiency, but the warmth that had once made the space a sanctuary had vanished completely. The morning coffee tasted flat despite being brewed from premium beans. Breakfast appeared on plates that seemed somehow empty even when filled with food. Vanessa had hired a replacement service within days, a professional catering company that specialized in wealthy households, staffed by rotating chefs trained in contemporary cuisine and efficiency management. Their food was technically perfect, precisely seasoned, artfully presented, nutritionally balanced according to current dietary trends, but it lacked something indefinable, something that had nothing to do with technique or ingredient quality. The new service is quite professional, Vanessa announced during dinner, cutting into salmon that had been prepared exactly according to restaurant standards. Much more systematic than what we had before. They provide detailed nutritional analyses and weekly menu planning. Very modern approach. Jonathan grunted agreement without looking up from his tablet, where cryptocurrency prices demanded constant monitoring. His digital asset portfolio had continued its astronomical growth. Bitcoin investments alone worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes. Yet, wealth that accumulated with mathematical precision couldn't recreate the inexplicable satisfaction he'd once found in Maria's simple meals. The house felt different in ways that defied rational explanation. Rooms that had buzzed with invisible warmth now seemed merely expensive. The dining areas where Maria's carefully prepared meals had once gathered, the family became spaces to consume fuel while discussing portfolio performance and social obligations. Food appeared and disappeared with restaurant efficiency, leaving no emotional residue, creating no memories. Eli felt the absence most acutely, his 16-year-old sensitivity detecting changes too subtle for adults, numbed by privilege and routine. The kitchen had been his confessor, Maria his patient teacher, in lessons that extended far beyond cooking techniques. Without her steady presence, the mansion felt like an expensive hotel, impressive but ultimately hollow, filled with amenities that served function rather than fostering connection. I miss Maria's cooking, he said one evening, as the family consumed perfectly prepared but soulless pasta courtesy of the new catering service. The new chef trained at Culinary Institute, Vanessa replied dismissively, twirling linguine that had been crafted according to professional specifications. Much more qualified than... What we had before. Qualified for what? Eli pressed, his voice carrying the stubborn idealism of adolescence that hadn't yet learned to accept convenient lies. Making food taste like nothing? Creating meals nobody remembers? Jonathan finally looked up from his cryptocurrency app, irritated by conversation that distracted from market analysis. The new service provides consistent quality without the complications of individual personalities. It's more efficient. But efficiency couldn't explain why Jonathan sometimes found himself wondering what Maria would have prepared for specific occasions, how she would have accommodated particular guests' preferences, what stories she might have shared about ingredients and techniques. Her absence created phantom tastes, memories of flavors that had once made eating pleasurable rather than perfunctory. The household staff who remained, cleaning crews, maintenance workers, gardeners, moved with the nervous efficiency of people who understood their own expendability. Maria's dismissal had reminded everyone that loyalty meant nothing when suspicion required scapegoats, that decades of faithful service could be erased by accusations that never faced genuine investigation. 3 months after Maria's firing, Jonathan began experiencing what his doctor diplomatically called stress-related digestive issues. The physician recommended dietary modifications, prescription medications, lifestyle changes that might address symptoms without examining underlying causes. But the real problem wasn't medical. It was the absence of food prepared with intention rather than mere competence. The catering service's rotating staff brought technical expertise, but no consistency of care. Meals arrived precisely on schedule, met all specified requirements, satisfied contractual obligations without creating satisfaction. The food nourished bodies while starving souls, filling stomachs without feeding hearts. Vanessa seemed initially pleased with the new arrangement, enjoying the prestige of professional catering service and the absence of personal relationships that required courtesy or consideration. But even she began to notice that dinner parties lacked the warm success that had once made the Riley home sought after by Chicago's social elite. Guests consumed the meals politely, praised the presentation appropriately, then departed without the lingering satisfaction that had once extended conversations late into evenings. The kitchen itself became a sterile workspace, efficiently organized but emotionally vacant. The catering staff used it like a laboratory, preparing food according to predetermined formulas, cleaning equipment with industrial thoroughness, leaving no trace of personality or individual care. The small touches that had made Maria's presence felt, fresh herbs growing on windowsills, carefully maintained spice collections organized by cuisine and preference, wooden spoons seasoned by decades of use, had been replaced by standardized equipment and institutional supplies. Winter arrived early that year, Chicago wind cutting through the Gold Coast with particular vengeance. The mansion's heating system maintained perfect temperature control, but warmth had become purely mechanical. No aromatic soup simmered on back burners, no bread baked from scratch-filled rooms with yeasty promise, no cinnamon and vanilla suggested that someone cared enough to create comfort food for difficult days. Jonathan found himself eating out more frequently, searching restaurant menus for flavors that reminded him of something he couldn't articulate. He'd ordered dishes similar to what Maria had prepared, roasted chicken, vegetable soups, simple pasta with herbs. But professional restaurant preparations never captured the elusive quality that had made her food memorable. His cryptocurrency investments continued generating unprecedented returns, while his relationship with food deteriorated into mere consumption. He could afford any meal in Chicago, dine at restaurants that charged more for single courses than Maria had earned in weeks, but wealth couldn't purchase the satisfaction he'd once taken for granted. The mansion's dinner table, once a gathering place where Maria's meals had provided focal points for family conversation, became a space where individuals consumed fuel while absorbed in personal devices. The catering service's efficient presentations weren't designed to encourage lingering or connection. They were optimized for consumption and cleanup, meeting nutritional requirements without fostering emotional bonds. Eli began skipping family dinners entirely, grabbing takeout food that at least carried the personality of its creators. He'd eat alone in his room while doing homework, avoiding the dining room that had once provided refuge from academic stress and adolescent confusion. The kitchen that had been his classroom and confessional was now off limits, transformed into a sterile workspace where strangers prepared food with professional competence but personal indifference. Late at night, when the household slept and cryptocurrency markets operated with global timing that ignored local schedules, Jonathan sometimes wandered through the mansion's empty spaces. He'd pass the kitchen, where specialized equipment hummed with electronic efficiency, remembering mornings when the same space had buzzed with Maria's quiet energy and purposeful movements. The absence created its own presence, a palpable void that expensive replacements couldn't fill. 20 years of accumulated care had been erased in 30 minutes of accusation and dismissal, leaving behind a hollowness that no amount of professional service could address. The Riley family had traded connection for efficiency, warmth for convenience, humanity for institutional competence, but truth, like hunger, has its own persistence. And some absences create needs that can't be satisfied by money alone. The truth emerged slowly, revealed in fragments that accumulated like evidence at a crime scene. It began with Eli's systematic investigation, a 16-year-old boy whose love for Maria overcame his family's willingness to accept convenient lies. Using skills learned in advanced computer classes at his elite private school, he began examining security footage that covered every area of the mansion except the sacred privacy of bedrooms and bathrooms. The cameras had recorded everything: Maria's comings and goings, her movements through kitchen spaces, her interactions with delivery personnel and maintenance staff. Hours of digital evidence that proved what Eli had known instinctively. Maria had never accessed any recipe box, had never removed anything from the mansion beyond her own meager personal belongings. But the cameras also revealed something more damning: footage of Vanessa herself removing a small wooden box from the pantry shelf 3 days before Maria's dismissal, carrying it to her bedroom where recording devices weren't permitted. The timestamp was clear, the image unmistakable, the implications devastating for someone who had built her accusation on absolute certainty of Maria's guilt. Armed with this evidence, Eli confronted his mother during one of her afternoon social gatherings, when several friends had assembled to discuss charity fundraising and cryptocurrency investment strategies over professionally catered refreshments that tasted expensive but felt empty. The women's conversation flowed around topics that demonstrated wealth without revealing wisdom: second homes in Aspen, art acquisitions that appreciated faster than stock portfolios, children attending universities that charged more per semester than most people earned in years. "Mother," Eli said, entering the drawing room with laptop under his arm and righteous fury in his adolescent voice, "we need to discuss Maria." Vanessa looked up from explaining her successful investment in green energy stocks, irritation replacing social charm. "That matter is closed, Eli. We don't discuss former staff with company present." "Actually, we do need to discuss it," Eli replied, opening his computer and positioning the screen so everyone could witness what he'd discovered. "Especially since I have security footage proving Maria never touched any recipe box." The room fell silent with the particular quiet that accompanies public exposure of private lies. Vanessa's friends, women who built their social standing on careful image management, recognized scandal developing in real time. They'd witnessed enough social destruction to understand when someone's reputation was about to crumble publicly. The security footage played with digital clarity that left no room for interpretation. There was Vanessa on Tuesday afternoon, removing the wooden box from its pantry shelf. There was Vanessa carrying it upstairs. There was Maria, hours later, working normally in the kitchen without approaching the area where the alleged theft supposedly occurred. Timestamps proved the sequence, camera angles eliminated doubt, evidence established truth with mathematical precision. "This doesn't prove anything," Vanessa stammered, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack like expensive makeup in summer heat. She could have taken the recipe earlier, replaced the box. But Eli had prepared for desperate deflections. His investigation had been thorough, systematic, worthy of the advanced analytical training his expensive education provided. He showed footage from previous weeks, demonstrating that the recipe box had remained untouched in its usual location until Vanessa herself removed it just days before Maria's dismissal. There was no stolen recipe, Eli announced to the assembled women, his voice carrying the moral authority of someone willing to sacrifice social comfort for truth. There was no valuable family formula worth $50,000. Mother invented the entire story because she wanted Maria gone and needed a reason that wouldn't make her look cruel. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Vanessa's friends exchanged glances that communicated volumes about social hierarchies, reputation management, and the careful distance maintained between accomplices and victims of exposure. These were women who understood that association with scandal could contaminate their own carefully curated images. The box was worthless, Eli continued, his laptop display showing photographs he'd taken of the container's contents, empty except for contemporary recipe cards copied from popular magazines, nothing authentic or antique or valuable. Just another prop in Mother's ongoing performance of having heritage worth more than money. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices raised above acceptable social levels. His arrival coincided with the moment when private family dysfunction became public spectacle, when his wife's lies were exposed before witnesses whose gossip could damage their standing in Chicago's elite social circles. "What's happening here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authoritative edge he'd developed through decades of managing business crises and cryptocurrency market volatility. Eli turned the laptop toward his father, replaying security footage with the patient precision of someone presenting evidence that couldn't be dismissed or rationalized away. "Maria didn't steal anything," he said simply. "She was fired for a theft that never happened, accused of taking something that never existed, dismissed because Mother wanted her gone and needed a justification that preserved her own image." The implications crashed over Jonathan like a Chicago winter storm. Sudden, brutal, comprehensive in their destructive force. His wife had lied. His loyal employee had been falsely accused. His family's reputation now depended on how he responded to evidence of injustice that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Vanessa's friends began making polite excuses about prior commitments and unexpected scheduling conflicts. Social gatherings could survive many forms of embarrassment, but witnessing someone's lies exposed in real time created liability risks for anyone hoping to maintain their own reputation intact. Within 15 minutes, the drawing room had emptied of everyone except the Riley family members forced to confront truth they'd all handled differently. "You've made your point," Vanessa said to Eli, her voice sharp with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed narrative has collapsed publicly. "But this changes nothing. She's gone. We've moved on. Bringing her back would only create more drama." "It changes everything," Eli countered, his 16-year-old idealism refusing to accept pragmatic calculations that prioritized convenience over justice. "We falsely accused her. We destroyed her reputation. We threw away 20 years of loyal service because you wanted to hurt someone who made you feel inadequate." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from Maria's dismissed kitchen fire, acrid, toxic, impossible to ignore despite everyone's desire to pretend it hadn't been spoken aloud. Jonathan found himself caught between his son's moral certainty and his wife's desperate damage control, between doing what was right and maintaining the social stability that protected his business interests. His cryptocurrency fortune had grown beyond imagination during the months since Maria's dismissal, digital assets multiplying with algorithmic precision while his family's moral foundation eroded through neglect and deliberate deception. He possessed wealth that could solve almost any problem except the one confronting him now. how to address injustice he'd enabled through indifference and prejudice. "We need to find her," Eli said, his voice carrying determination beyond his years. "We need to apologize. We need to make this right." But making things right would require admitting they'd been wrong, a concession that threatened the comfortable narratives the Riley family had constructed around their own virtue and Maria's disposability. Truth demanded accountability, and accountability required sacrificing the fiction that wealth provided wisdom or that privilege justified prejudice. The reckoning had begun, but forgiveness would require more than evidence. It would require humility from people who'd forgotten how to practice it. The search for Maria began with Eli's stubborn determination, but quickly expanded to consume Jonathan's guilty conscience and expensive resources. Private investigators, social service agencies, employment networks, every avenue that money could access was explored with the same systematic thoroughness Jonathan applied to cryptocurrency market analysis. Locating one displaced domestic worker in a city of nearly 3 million people required persistence that surprised everyone involved. Maria had vanished into Chicago's invisible economy, that vast network of working people whose labor sustained American prosperity while their identities remained unknown to the privileged classes they served. She'd taken jobs that paid daily wages, cleaning office buildings before dawn, preparing food at restaurants where customers never saw kitchen staff, caring for elderly clients whose families hired help through agencies that maintained careful distance between service providers and recipients. The investigation revealed how thoroughly the wealthy remained isolated from working-class struggles. Maria had applied for dozens of positions, her 20 years of experience overshadowed by the gap in employment that potential employers interpreted as a warning sign. References from the Riley family would have solved the problem immediately, but requesting such support from people who dismissed her for theft was impossible. She'd found refuge in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, the same area where she'd first lived 20 years earlier after arriving from Mexico, with nothing but hope and determination. The community absorbed her quietly, understanding without explanation that someone had experienced the kinds of injustice that wealthy employers inflicted on vulnerable workers. No questions were asked about her past. Present need was sufficient to generate support. The private investigator finally located her through employment records at La Cocina Esperanza, a small family restaurant on 18th Street that served authentic Mexican food to construction workers, taxi drivers, and immigrants whose budgets couldn't accommodate trendy fusion establishments. She worked there 6 days a week, arriving before sunrise to prepare traditional dishes from memory and intuition, recreating flavors that connected her customers to homes they'd left behind, seeking better opportunities. Jonathan's first visit to Pilsen shocked him with its distance from his Gold Coast reality. The neighborhood pulsed with life that his wealth had insulated him from experiencing. Small businesses operating on razor-thin margins, families crowded into apartments that cost more per square foot than his mansion's guest rooms, children playing on streets where Spanish mixed with English in conversations that bridged cultures and generations. La Cocina Esperanza occupied a narrow storefront between a coin laundry and a currency exchange. Its windows steamed with the breath of industrial stoves and the dreams of people who cooked professionally but rarely ate recreationally. The interior held maybe 30 customers when packed, its mismatched furniture and amateur wall murals creating warmth that Jonathan's expensive designer dining rooms had never achieved despite their million-dollar decor budgets. Maria was smaller than Jonathan remembered, her frame seemingly compressed by months of economic stress and emotional uncertainty. She wore the same white apron style that had been her uniform at the mansion, but this version was stained with honest sweat rather than maintained by professional laundry services. Her movements retained the graceful efficiency he'd thoughtlessly consumed for 20 years, but her eyes carried wariness that hadn't existed when she'd trusted his family's basic decency. The moment of recognition was electric with accumulated pain and shame. Jonathan stood in the crowded restaurant doorway, his expensive suit marking him as foreign to the working-class environment, his presence disrupting the comfortable anonymity Maria had rebuilt around her wounded dignity. Conversations paused as customers noticed the incongruity. A Gold Coast millionaire seeking someone in a neighborhood where his wealth meant nothing except demonstration of the inequality that structured their city. "Mrs. Esperanza," Jonathan said formally, using her surname for perhaps the first time in 20 years of employing her daily services. "I wonder if we might speak privately." Maria looked up from the industrial griddle where she'd been preparing fresh tortillas, her face cycling through emotions too complex for simple categorization. Surprise, fear, anger, curiosity, all present simultaneously in features that had weathered months of financial stress and social displacement caused by his family's casual cruelty. "I am working," she replied carefully, her English more formal than the comfortable conversations they'd once shared during brief kitchen encounters. "This is not a good time for visiting." But the restaurant's owner, Maria's cousin Rosa, who'd provided employment when no one else would risk hiring someone dismissed under suspicious circumstances, recognized that some conversations couldn't be postponed indefinitely. She gestured toward a small table in the corner, away from customers who were trying not to eavesdrop on drama that clearly involved more than casual social interaction. The conversation began with Jonathan's awkward attempts at apology, his business training providing no guidance for addressing personal failures or moral bankruptcy. He'd negotiated million-dollar cryptocurrency investments, but struggled to find words for acknowledging 20 years of taking someone for granted, then allowing them to be destroyed by lies he'd never bothered to investigate. "Eli discovered the truth," he finally said, placing printed security camera photographs on the small table between them. "The recipe box, the theft accusation, none of it was real. Vanessa created the entire story because she wanted you gone and needed a reason that wouldn't make her look cruel." Maria studied the photographs with the careful attention she'd once applied to reading his family's dietary preferences and maintaining detailed records of their medical restrictions. The evidence was overwhelming. Timestamps, camera angles, sequences that proved her innocence with mathematical precision while revealing the calculated nature of the deception that had destroyed her reputation. 20 years I worked for your family," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated betrayal and the peculiar dignity of someone who'd survived injustice without becoming bitter. 20 years of getting up at 4:30 in the morning, of cooking with love, of caring for your children when you were too busy making money to notice they needed attention. The words cut deeper than any angry accusation could have, their measured sadness more devastating than fury would have been. Jonathan found himself confronting not just his family's recent cruelty, but decades of indifference, taking for granted someone whose devotion had sustained his household, while he focused obsessively on accumulating wealth that couldn't purchase the loyalty he'd casually discarded. "I want to make this right," Jonathan said, the phrase sounding hollow even as he spoke it. "Whatever compensation seems appropriate, however we can acknowledge the wrong that was done." But Maria's slight smile carried no comfort for his guilty conscience. "Some things cannot be fixed with money, Mr. Riley. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that don't disappear because someone writes a check." They sat in silence while the restaurant buzzed around them, working people consuming meals prepared with the same care Maria had once provided his family, finding satisfaction and connection in food that cost less than Jonathan spent on single cocktails during business dinners. The contrast emphasized everything he'd lost through prejudice and indifference. "Eli wants to see you," Jonathan offered, grasping for connection points that might bridge the chasm his family had created. "He's been learning to cook, trying to recreate some of the dishes you taught him. He says nothing tastes the same." For the first time, Maria's expression softened slightly, maternal affection transcending personal hurt. "Eli is a good boy. He has a kind heart, like his grandfather had before money changed your family's priorities." The reference to Jonathan's father, a man who'd built the family's initial wealth through manufacturing rather than speculation, who'd treated employees with respect rather than disposability, struck particularly deeply. Jonathan remembered childhood visits to his father's factory, watching workers whose names his father knew, whose family situations he tracked, whose loyalty he earned through consistent fairness rather than demanding through economic necessity. "Come back," Jonathan said suddenly, the words emerging from desperation rather than calculation. "The house isn't the same without you. The food has no soul. The kitchen feels empty. Everything tastes like nothing despite costing more than what you used to prepare." Maria's laugh held no humor, only the tired wisdom of someone who'd learned painful lessons about privilege and its limitations. "You want me to return so your eggs taste better? So your guilt feels manageable? I am not a recipe that can be purchased and forgotten again when convenient." The rejection was absolute, but not cruel, delivered with the gentle firmness of someone who'd grown beyond the need for revenge while refusing to enable continued exploitation. Maria had survived the worst they could inflict and discovered strength that didn't depend on their approval or employment. As Jonathan prepared to leave, defeated by his inability to repair damage that transcended financial gestures, Maria offered one final observation that would haunt his remaining years. "You had everything, Mr. Riley. House full of love, children who needed guidance, wife who needed purpose, fortune that could have blessed many people. But you chose numbers over people, wealth over wisdom. Money multiplied while everything meaningful disappeared. Now you want to buy back what was freely given for 20 years, but dismissed in 20 minutes. The truth followed Jonathan home to his Gold Coast mansion, where professional caterers continued providing technically perfect meals that satisfied nothing beyond basic nutritional requirements. He'd learned the difference between feeding and nourishing, between consuming and connecting, between having everything and meaning nothing. But Maria's forgiveness, when it finally came, arrived through channels he never expected, carrying lessons about grace that no cryptocurrency investment could teach. The final chapter began not with grand gestures or expensive compensations, but with small acts of persistence that gradually bridged the chasm created by betrayal and prejudice. Eli had never stopped visiting La Cocina Esperanza, becoming a regular customer who consumed authentic Mexican food while rebuilding a relationship with the woman who'd taught him that cooking was conversation between ingredients and intentions. "Your father came to see me," Maria told him during one of their weekly visits, her hands busy preparing tamales while they talked. "He wants to fix what cannot be repaired with money." Eli, now 17, and possessed of the stubborn idealism that comes with seeing clearly what adults complicate through compromise and social calculation, had his own plans for addressing his family's moral failures. "He should want to fix it," Eli replied, carefully spreading masa on corn husks under Maria's patient instruction. "But wanting and doing are different actions." The boy had continued learning to cook, not in his family's sterile catering service kitchen, but in Maria's cousin's restaurant, where real people prepared authentic food for customers who appreciated both flavor and affordability. His techniques remained amateur, but his understanding had grown sophisticated. He knew now that great cooking required more than expensive ingredients and professional equipment. It needed heart, history, and respect for the people who would consume what you created. "I'm opening my own restaurant," Eli announced during one lesson, his voice carrying determination beyond his years. "Not some trendy fusion place for rich people who want Instagram photos. A real restaurant where working people can afford good food, where every dish tells a story about the hands that prepared it." Maria smiled, recognizing the echo of lessons she'd taught in a mansion kitchen where her wisdom had gone unrecognized for 20 years. Restaurants are difficult businesses. They require money, experience, understanding of customers who have many choices about where to spend their earnings. "I know," Eli replied, shaping tamales with increasing confidence. "But I also have advantages other people don't. Dad's cryptocurrency investments have made our family wealthy beyond imagination. I can afford to charge fair prices, pay honest wages, create the kind of place you've been dreaming about for decades." The conversation that followed revealed Eli's comprehensive plan. A restaurant that would employ immigrants at wages that supported entire families, source ingredients from local farmers and suppliers, serve authentic food at prices working people could afford while maintaining quality that wealthy customers would respect. He'd spent months researching business models, studying successful restaurants that prioritized community service over maximum profit margins. "I want you to be the head chef," Eli said simply. "Not as an employee, but as a partner. Someone whose name appears on signs and menus and business licenses. Someone whose knowledge gets the recognition it deserves." Maria's eyes filled with tears. The first time Eli had seen her cry since the false accusation had destroyed her reputation and employment with his family. But these weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of recognition, of finally being seen for who she'd always been beneath the invisibility that domestic service had imposed. "Your parents would never approve," she said gently, understanding the family dynamics that would complicate such a partnership. "My parents lost their right to approve or disapprove when they chose lies over truth," Eli replied with the moral clarity that privileged adults often abandon in favor of social convenience. "I'm old enough to make my own decisions about who deserves respect and partnership." The restaurant opened 6 months later in a renovated building on Chicago's North Side, positioned between gentrifying neighborhoods and working-class communities. Corazon, Heart, reflected both its mission and its primary chef's understanding that food without soul was just expensive fuel for people too busy to appreciate nourishment that fed more than physical hunger. The menu featured dishes Maria had perfected over decades of cooking for people who'd never acknowledged her expertise. Complex moles that required days of preparation, soups that tasted like love made tangible, desserts that carried memories of homeland and heritage. But also American comfort foods prepared with techniques learned through careful observation of what people actually craved rather than what dietary trends suggested they should want. Jonathan attended the grand opening, not as invited guest, but as someone who needed to witness the resurrection of talents his family had tried to destroy through prejudice and casual cruelty. He stood in the crowded restaurant, watching Maria move through her kitchen with authority rather than invisibility. Seeing her name printed in elegant script on menus and business cards, and the window sign that announced her partnership in an enterprise dedicated to feeding people rather than impressing them. The evening's success was evident not in expensive presentations or celebrity endorsements, but in the faces of customers who found satisfaction in food prepared with respect for their budgets and their need for genuine nourishment. Construction workers sat beside office employees, immigrants shared tables with college students, elderly couples celebrated anniversaries with meals that cost less than single cocktails at Gold Coast establishments. "She looks happy," Vanessa observed, her voice carrying reluctant admiration for someone whose resilience had overcome everything the Riley family had inflicted. "I didn't think she would recover from..." "What happened?" Jonathan watched Maria training young cooks in techniques that emphasized care over speed, quality over quantity, respect for ingredients, and customers whose trust had to be earned through consistent excellence rather than demanded through economic necessity. She'd found her proper place, not serving someone else's vision, but creating her own. "We underestimated her," Jonathan admitted, the words carrying 20 years of regret compressed into one moment of honest recognition. "We thought money made us superior when it just made us comfortable. She was always the most valuable person in our house, but we treated her like expensive furniture." The evening ended with Maria approaching their table, her chef's coat bearing small stains that represented honest work rather than performance of service for unappreciative audiences. She moved with quiet dignity, no longer the invisible woman who'd absorbed their indifference for 2 decades. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, her courtesy perfect, but her warmth reserved for people who'd earned it through respect rather than expecting it through wealth. "Maria," Jonathan said, rising from his chair with the awkward formality of someone attempting to demonstrate respect he'd never bothered showing previously. I want you to know that Eli was right about everything, about the truth, about what we owed you, about who deserves recognition for talents we took for granted." She nodded once, acknowledgement without absolution, recognition without reconciliation. Some wounds heal but leave scars that remind everyone involved about the cost of cruelty and the value of treating people with dignity rather than disposability. "Your son is a good partner," Maria said simply. "He understands that success means feeding people well, not just making money efficiently. You taught him about wealth. I'm teaching him about worth." Years passed. Corazon became Chicago's most beloved restaurant, not for celebrity endorsements or Michelin stars, but for consistent excellence that respected both traditional techniques and customers' needs. Maria's recipes were featured in magazines that credited her innovations and cultural knowledge rather than treating her as anonymous labor. Food Network producers courted her for television shows that would showcase authentic techniques rather than performance cooking designed for entertainment. Jonathan visited regularly, not as former employer expecting special treatment, but as customer grateful for meals prepared by someone whose talents he'd finally learned to appreciate. His cryptocurrency fortune continued multiplying with digital precision, while his understanding of the wealth's true value evolved through lessons taught by a woman whose worth he'd dismissed for 20 years. The mansion still stood in Chicago's Gold Coast, its value appreciating with real estate markets, while its soul remained empty. Professional catering services continued meeting nutritional requirements while failing to create memories or connections. Jonathan had learned the difference between expensive meals and meaningful food, between consuming calories and sharing nourishment prepared with love rather than mere competence. His final lesson came during Christmas dinner at Corazon, where Maria had prepared traditional Mexican holiday foods alongside American classics for customers whose families gathered around restaurant tables when home kitchens couldn't accommodate celebration needs. The meal cost less than single bottles of wine Jonathan's family typically consumed, but provided satisfaction that no expensive dining experience had ever achieved. "I used to think wealth meant having choices," Jonathan told Maria as she personally served dessert, flan made from her grandmother's recipe, its smooth sweetness carrying stories about heritage and tradition that connected past to present through careful preservation of culinary artistry. "You always had choices, Mr. Riley," Maria replied gently, her voice carrying the wisdom earned through survival and eventual triumph over injustice. "You chose comfort over connection, accumulation over appreciation, efficiency over empathy. Money didn't limit your choices. It revealed them." The truth of that observation accompanied Jonathan home to his lonely mansion, where automated systems maintained perfect temperature control, while warmth remained the one thing his fortune couldn't purchase. He had learned that the most valuable people in anyone's life aren't the ones who serve your ambitions, but those who nourish your humanity through daily acts of love that masquerade as simple labor. And you, have you ever cooked for someone who never said thank you? Have you ever given your heart to people who treated it as hired service? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe so this message reaches another woman who cooks with her soul. For more heartfelt stories like this, click the podcast link on the left. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. See you in the next story.